Hello everyone, this is Genius Yoshi, and today we look at the status of the metagame in October. And some of the insights from this video might surprise you. Now, most of us have a pretty good idea of what are the top tier 1 decks at the moment, but the win rates from recent tournaments shows something quite interesting. So, for this tier list, instead of going after my perceptions like I did last time, this time it's going to be purely analytics based off of tournament results. So we're going to go over the last 4 tournaments for which I have data and see what are our takeaways from this. Let's take a look at the Bearded Dragon, Lorcana 1K, the Game Castle Box Tournament, and the CM Games 2K. All tournaments with 60, 52, 78 people attending, so a moderate amount of participation. And over in the green bubbles, I highlight the number of decks of each archetype that showed up in the top 8. So for the Bearded Dragon Lorcana 1K, we've had 3 Amber Steel Song decks make the top 8, and 3 Ruby Amethyst deck lists making the top 8. Not overly surprising, right? Ruby Amethyst has been named one of the strongest decks pretty much since week 2 of the Lorcana metagame. And Steel Amber Songs has been just trashing most decks. It's just very powerful engine, very reliable, lots of depth in the games, and a very strong deck that came out maybe a month ago and has been at the top of the metagame ever since. Then we look at the other decks that made the top 8. We have an Emerald Amethyst deck and an Emerald Steel deck. Alright, well, there's some diversity in the format. That's good. Let's go look at Game Castle Box Tournament. 52 players. We have in the top 8, 2 Amber Steel decks, 1 Ruby Amethyst, and a variety of other decks. So again, we have 1 Emerald Amethyst, Emerald Sapphire, just a little mismatch of everything. So based on that tournament result, we're like, oh, okay, there's some diversity in the metagame. People are playing different stuff, making the top 8. And then we look at the CM Games 2K, and we're back to the known picture. 1 Amber Steel in the top 8, 4 Ruby Amethyst in the top 8, 2 Emerald Amethyst, and 1 Emerald Ruby. Now out of this, I'm not overly surprised at seeing Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst in the top 8 at all of these tournaments and taking half the spots, over half the spots. So we have 6, 7, 8, 9, plus 5, 14 out of 24. More than half of the top 8 are in these 2 archetypes. But the one thing that surprised me is the presence of this Amber Emerald. There's 4 lists that made the top 8, which is quite a significant amount. Not as much as the other top 2 decks, but still some level of representation. And this brings us to the Octagons. Tournoi Lorcana Octagon. 128 players. Now that's a large tournament. And what I love about this one is they actually played out the top 8. And we've gotten distributions in win rate. So let's actually zoom in a little bit. Well, top 2 most present decks in the metagame are, as we'd expect, Amber Amethyst and Steel Amber Songs. No surprises there. Then in the next 2 decks, there's Emerald variant deck, and we see that Amber Amethyst build being at 7.5% of the field. So again, that deck seems to show up quite a bit right behind the top 2 most impactful decks of the format. But what I find interesting of this diagram is the win rate and the conversion into top 8. So conversion into top 8, so we have pretty much the exact same amount of Ruby Amethyst as Amber Steel decks, but we've gotten 4 Amber Steel decks that made it to the top 8 and only 1 Ruby Amethyst. And if we look at the win rate, Ruby Amethyst only had a 48.47% win rate, sub 50%. And let's look at Amber Steel. Amber Steel had a whopping 57.3% win rate. That's a huge difference in terms of win rates. And if we take a look at all of the other decks, I mean, the Emerald Steel, sub 50% at 47, Emerald Amethyst, 44, Sapphire Steel, 39, Ruby Emerald, I think that's 27. Ooh, that's pretty bad. So the win rates drop off a cliff. Well, and if we want to look at the next deck that has a 50% win rate, we have to go all the way to the small slice of Steel Amethyst, which is probably a little too small to be a good representation of the win rate of the deck. So our takeaway is Amber Steel takes up the largest chunk of the metagame with Ruby Amethyst, but Amber Steel is the only deck that has a win rate over 50%. And it's way over 50%. It's 57%. That's a huge gap. It's not like a 40, 54, 55, and it's a large percentage of the metagame that's playing this and winning. People are prepared for this deck and can't deal with it. And to me, this is a leading indicator of a problematic deck that can turn into a tier 0, especially if its matchups against Ruby Amethyst are fairly good. I personally think they're pretty good. Then it can eclipse that deck out of the metagame and essentially becomes tier 0. But for now, based on the other 3 tournaments, there is pretty much a 50-50% split in the tier 1 between Ruby Amethyst and Amber Steel, but we have to be careful to take into account that large win rate in this such a big tournament. And also, Amber Steel did win the tournament. A lot of them were pitted against each other in the top 8. Well, when 50% of the top 8 is playing your archetype, you're going to be playing some mirror matches. So quite interesting insights there. Pretty much everything that's playing Sapphire is not doing too well. And we have this big slice of Sapphire decks kind of in the top left. People trying different things. So Sapphire hasn't found a color pairing that's really you must be playing these 2 colors together. It's really, I'm trying Sapphire, I'll try it with some ink type. As in the Steel Amber and Ruby Amethyst have these very defined pairings. Which brings us to our tier list. Based on our discussions, I'm going to keep Amber Steel and Ruby Amethyst as part of the tier 1. I'm not quite willing yet to give Amber Steel a tier 0 status because it would need to take a lot more of the shares of the metagame. And really, the tier 1 has been played by about 50% of the players. So there's still some room in the metagame. It's moderately healthy. Moderately healthy, really, because it's on the edge of having 2 archetypes completely dominate the format, on the edge of a tier 0. But for now, people are still trying different decks. Maybe it's because of a shortage of cards. Maybe it's because people have their own lists that they really like and they think they can take down the top decks. And maybe people just aren't following the metagame in as much details as we are right now. Then for the tier 2 decks, I'm going to give it to Emerald Amethyst because that deck showed up in all of the top 8s of the 4 tournaments. I'm also going to give another spot to Emerald Steel based on the Octagon results for being the 3rd most represented deck there before the win rates fall off the cliff. And then in tier 3 is the other Emerald list that had a decent win rate at Octagon, and that is quite widely talked about on the internet, the Lemon Lime or Amber Emerald deck. And I'm going to just leave a generic Sapphire in tier 3 as Sapphire just hasn't been performing up to snuff in the metagame so far. I hope that you've enjoyed this video where I go over the tier list in a much more data-driven way than my previous tier list. Let me know if you agree with the rankings that I've provided so far, and what are your thoughts on the direction of the metagame. My personal opinion is I think we're going to be inching forward with Amber Steel becoming more and more prominent in tournament results and monopolizing that win rate, and we're going to see a slight drop in Amber Amethyst. That's my prediction for the future. Let me know what you think, and what do you think is going to be breaking the metagame. In the meantime, I should go and start to work on trying to break the metagame or making some fun deck lists. Maybe a bit about a fun deck list that breaks the metagame. That's also pretty nice. Alright, well, I better get to it. In the meantime, thanks again for watching the video. Leave a comment, hit the like button an odd number of times so it stays with a thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.